Well, you saw them question Tim Geithner on the AIG bailout today on the Hill. Now we're going to question them. Congressman Dennis Kucinich is a Democrat from Ohio who sits on the Government Oversight and Reform Committee, and Congressman Jim Jordan is a Republican also from Ohio who is also on the committee. Thanks to both of you guys for joining us. We really appreciate it. Timothy Geithner said today that if they had paid a haircut on the debt that AIG owed, or the bonds, that the whole system would have gone under. Did you buy that? What do you think? I'll start with you, Mr. Kucinich.
Well, it's easy to maintain that now. The question that we're asking is, why did, with respect to Goldman Sachs, when Goldman Sachs said, look, we're fully hedged against any kind of defaults. We have insurance. Why did the New York Fed go ahead and pay them 100 cents on the dollar when there were other insurance companies at play and when there was litigation potentially at play? That was the part of the hearing that just didn't sit well with me, and I'm sure other committee members.
Well, he said because, the reason why we had to pay them 100 cents on the dollar is the whole system would have gone down. If not, are you saying that you don't believe that? You didn't buy that?
For $2.5 billion? You got to be kidding me.
Okay, so you didn't buy it?
No.
No. Congressman Jordan, how about you?
No, I mean, and look, Mr. Geithner's testimony didn't pass the smell test. I mean, on one hand, he says in both his oral and written testimony, we had to do this, the world was going to end, the sky was going to fall, we had to make sure the counterparties got paid at par. It goes on. And then he tells us, but you know what? It was so important, we had to do this, I was critical to making this decision, but I wasn't around for any of the disclosure. I mean, that's the part that gets people. Okay, you made the decision, it was so important, even though, as members on the committee pointed out, you let Bear go under and let them take a huge haircut. Even though that happened, you made the decision, you had to do this in the best interest of the American people, but we're not going to tell the American people how the $62 billion was spent. That's the big issue here, the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability. So, and remember the context. This was in November of 2009. 2008. This is the guy who's going to be the next Treasury Secretary of the United States of America. This was the guy who was the indispensable man, the guy we had to have, in spite of the fact he didn't pay his taxes. Right. In spite of all, he was the guy we had to have. He's so important, and yet he's not there exercising any influence on how this information is disclosed, and he wouldn't even answer the question. Did he think the folks at the Fed who supposedly did make this decision to hold off on disclosure, he wouldn't even say whether he supported their decision or not. He backed away from that completely. This is the Treasury Secretary of the United States taking that position. That's what doesn't pass the smell test. It
sounds to me like you didn't believe his testimony today. What do you think should be done as a result of that? I mean, do you think he should stay in his position?
Well, I think the American people are going to weigh in on that decision, and obviously it's up to the President of the United States. But I did not think he helped himself at all today. And frankly, I think he pointed out this pattern. We had former Secretary Paulson in front of the committee too, and we pointed out, he sold to Congress initially when this whole thing started that the TARP program was going to be to buy these troubled assets, and yet 10 days after that bill passed, they had already changed direction completely. And we put up the statement from his spokesman, Michelle Davis, who said before the vote we might have to inject. Secretary Paulson told her we might have to inject capital into the banks and not buy the troubled assets, and she said we can't tell Congress that. We can't be truthful with Congress. So this pattern of deception and lack of transparency was there right from the beginning, and we've seen it throughout this entire process.
Congressman Kucinich, do you agree with those opinions, and what do you think the future of Tim Geithner should be?
I don't think that Tim Geithner lied. I think he's a pretty decent guy. But the problem is the philosophy that he brought to Treasury, which is essentially let the finance economy be protected at the expense of the rest of the economy, has kept millions of Americans in trouble with their mortgages, has stopped a recovery. And I think the underlying question here is, can America continue to see this separation between a government which takes care of the finance economy but isn't investing in jobs on Main Street, on infrastructure, on making sure that we have a transition to green energy? I mean, that's, I think, what Massachusetts was about. It's a rebellion against an economic policy that just isn't delivering the resources to the people.
Kucinich, do you really believe that? I mean, do you really believe that?
Are you
there's
kidding?
No
I don't say anything I don't believe.
Wait, but you don't think there's a connection between what goes on in the financial industry and what goes on in the rest of the economy? You don't think that if AIG had gone under, it would have had an impact on the rest of America?
You know what? There are those who believe in trickle-down economics. You tell that to the 15 million Americans who are out of work. You tell that to one of 3 Americans who is underwater on their mortgages. You tell that to those of us who wanted to see the government take a controlling interest in mortgage-backed security, only to have representatives of 2 administrations tell us they're not going to do that. This is about, Wall Street not being connected with Main Street values
Melissa,
or concerns, and that's what I'm objecting to.
Melissa, here's the real concern. Look, this pattern of deception. We're told time and time again, we're said the sky's going to fall, the world's going to end if we don't get more money, and then they don't disclose exactly how they're going to spend the money. We saw that initially with the TARP program. We saw it with the Bank of America Merrill Lynch deal. We saw it now with the AIG and the counterparty payments. We're told one thing, how important this is, and yet they won't disclose to them. It's not about what Dennis talked about. It's about the fact that the government, with this unprecedented power, is not being straight with the American people, not being straight with the taxpayers who are paying the bill.
What's the remedy?
That's the real issue.
What's the remedy? Each of you tell me, because you're both really upset. So what's the remedy from here on out? What do you want to see done, and what do you want to see done to the people who are involved in, and you say weren't honest with all of us?
Well, we need transparency. We need to make sure that they tell it. And frankly, people need to be held accountable. If they were saying one thing and doing something else, they need to be held accountable, whether it's former Secretary Paulson or it's current Secretary Geithner. But we need transparency. That was what was missing. It took them until March of this year to finally disclose how the counterparties were paid and how much they got, when they should have done it back last November when they were in the process of making the payments.
The remedy is that institutions that are too big to fail are too big to exist. Number one. Number two, that we have to have a massive jobs program to stir the economy and get the money going back into Main Street. Number three, we have to make sure that the banks loosen up on their loans so that people and Main Street can create jobs again. We're not seeing that right now, and what we're seeing is laying the groundwork for a repeat of the administration previous to FDR.
Let me ask you. When Hank Paulson, when the CEO of Goldman Sachs was testifying, he said that they were fine. Their bets were hedged. They would have been fine if AIG had gone down. You heard today Hank Paulson and Tim Geithner said that wasn't the case, that if they hadn't backed up AIG, Goldman Sachs and others would have gone down. Who is lying?
Well, I think that you have to look at the fact that there's some disingenuousness here with Goldman Sachs saying, look, we're covered. We don't need any government help.
Were they lying?
And I think there was a misrepresentation. And I think that, lie is a dramatic word. There's a misrepresentation. And the misrepresentation is that they were fully hedged. Well, no one talked about, hey, if the government bails you out, your insurance, it doesn't cover you anymore. So then the government gives them 100% on 100 cents on a dollar. That's not fair to the taxpayers. The taxpayers should not have had to cover Goldman Sachs for 100 cents on a dollar. And the New York Fed didn't use its leverage that it had at the moment to protect the taxpayers' interests. That's what I have a problem with.
Yeah, Congressman Jordan, last word.
No, I think Dennis makes a good point here, and as I've said before, the idea that somehow Tim Geithner wasn't involved with the disclosure when he was in fact going to be named the next Treasury Secretary of the United States, when he was involved in all these other decisions, just doesn't pass the smell test.
Difficult to
He was
swallow.
involved in the decision. He should have been involved in the disclosure, and to say that he wasn't, I don't think flies.
Okay, some tough opinions, guys. Thanks to both of you for joining us. We really appreciate both of your time. Simon.
Melissa, 44 minutes to trade. Let's have a look at the rest.